Working with components isn't something specific to Unreal and the Unreal component system. Many languages and applications are made with what is called a component-based architecture, and those familiar with other engines, even such as Unity, would be familiar with reusing scripts between multiple game objects to reuse those common mechanics, which is a very kind of component-based approach. For that reason, I've provided some kind of extra reading links, so we're not going to go through these in detail. This could take a course by itself, just going through what I would class as some interesting reads, existing articles, and kind of small papers on a component-based architecture. Now, the first one here is by Ray Wenderlich. If we take a quick look at what this page is, there's some really nice tutorials on this page in general, but this is a really interesting insight to the way that components can kind of solve and address some of the existing issues in a more inheritance-based architecture, as noted down here. And I think that's super interesting, especially when you consider just how much of the Unreal structure is based very heavily on inheritance. Now, that's not to say it's a bad thing. This is more to cast some considerations and make you think about where you can start balancing inheritance with components to get the most reworkable project and in the long time save yourself some time in your projects. So this is a very good read. It actually goes through the entire process of making a small game, and I think this is super useful because not only are you looking at the concepts here, you have access to the code at the bottom. As you can see, it is quite a long read, which is why I've said we're not going to go through step by step on these things, but it does provide all of the code. So this is very useful that you actually see what is being described when the components are being talked about, how they're going to change things out. And you also get to see it as the result of the end game, which again is super useful because you have that whole process and you can see exactly where these concepts come together in the pipeline of a game. So I definitely recommend this one. This is a very good read, very well written, and even though it's not Unreal related, the kind of comparisons between inheritance and where components can really free up the development pipeline is very, very interesting here. So the next one, you probably saw that I have 3 tabs open over there. So we have the decoupling patterns, which is on gameprogrammingpatterns.com. So this one is a little bit more of a shorter read, which is quite nice. Again, you've got some code examples here. This one's quite nice again because the code is provided. It gives some examples of when you would want to use this kind of thing. It also has a kind of more structure-based approach as well in the writing. And then this is a very similar kind of language to what you would see inside of Unreal anyway, C-based language. So a lot of the syntax here is going to be very familiar, and you can see how something, again, outside of Unreal would fit in the same kind of concepts. Much shorter read, so again, definitely recommend going through this one. And the final one that I would recommend reading through, the component-based core game engine architecture. So this is what I'd class, I suppose, as a very small paper, which is written for someone's portfolio page. But again, some really interesting insights on this when I was reading through it. And what we have here is another article written. This is using C++. We have some nice examples here using kind of UML diagrams to see where things and kind of really visualize where things might come into causing a restriction, and then when the code and components are going to essentially address this. So this is another one based on a very kind of simple game or game engine. Again, it's in C++, which means the code is going to be very relevant to what we're going to be doing. And it does show some really nice, very simple, very much refined kind of examples of components in a more kind of native C++ approach here. So this is one thing I would mention though, is all of the ones that I found at least that were very interesting for me to read through and kind of track down to provide for this section. All of these have ended up being game engine related, to the point I think most of them, apart from Cocoa, are C or C++. The one thing I would say is definitely take a look around, look through some search results for a component-based architecture and see if you find anything interesting as well to dive into where this kind of thing is used a little bit more outside of game engines and game design, because it isn't just restricted to those kinds of development environments. So we've just taken a brief look at some of the options to learn more about component-based architecture in more generic development structures for people who might be interested to learn more about the topic.